Welcome back to In Response EDH. I'm your host Albert, and I'm glad you can join us for another awesome gameplay video. On today's episode, we have Daniel returning, and he's brought his colorless commander deck, led by the mother of all Eldrazi's, Emrakul, the Promised End. This deck is jam-packed with some of the biggest and scariest creatures the multiverse has to offer, and they're looking to annihilate the competition. He starts the game off with a Sensei's Divining Top, Soul Ring, Expedition Map, Torpor Orb, Kozilek, Butcher of Truth, Eldrazi Temple, and an Emergence Zone. Next we have Baron, and he's brought Sefris of the Hidden Ways. This deck is built around the venture into the dungeon mechanic. Baron wants his creatures to go to the graveyard so that he can recur them over and over again with Sefris' ability. He keeps an opening hand with Midnight Pathlighter, Painful Truths, Glenn the Voice of Calm, Orzhov Signet, Tainted Field, a Command Tower, and a Sunken Hollow. Jose is also joining us, and he brought with him Rayami, First of the Fallen. This is a deck he calls Keyword Soup, since Rayami really cares about creatures with keyword abilities going into the graveyard, so he can exile them and gain those abilities. He decides to keep a risky hand with Rampant Growth, Baleful Strix, Traverse the Ulvenwald, Vampire Nighthawk, Night's Whisper, Black Knight, and an island. And finally, I'll be playing my Yarok the Desecrated deck. This deck is your standard Yarok build. All the creatures in the deck have an ETB effect that's good on its own, but even better when it's doubled up. So I just want to outvalue my opponents and keep their boards clear, or just steal all the best permanents on the field. I keep an opening hand of Heroic Intervention, Nissa Vastwood Seer, Negate, Ulvenwald Hydra, Wooded Foothills, Reflecting Pool, and a snow-covered island. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you, if you enjoy the content and would like to support the channel, consider becoming a patron. When you do, you're not only contributing to the channel's growth, you're also being entered in our monthly patron giveaways, as well as receiving other patron-only perks and merch as well. All proceeds of our Patreon will be reinvested into the channel to bring you the best content possible. With that being said, and the introductions out of the way, let's start the game. I start the game off by playing a Wooded Foothills, pay 1 life to crack it in search of a Zagoth Triumph. Jose draws and prays it's a land. He doesn't find it, so he plays an island and passes. Daniel starts his turn by playing an Emergence Zone.
I'll play the turn 1 Soul Ring.
Nice.
I'll set Soul Ring for 2, and I'll play Torpor Orb, my favorite card. So all creatures enter the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger.
I'm okay with that. It's fine.
Sir, what is this? Why did you do that?
Just staring at it. They're playing Yarok.
Oh my
I'm
god.
just forcing you to play fairly.
Baron draws and plays a tapped Sunken Hollow, and passes to me. I draw for turn, and tap my land to cast my own Soul Ring. I follow that up by playing an Ancient Tomb.
Perfect.
Man, that is stopping me so bad. Jose draws for turn, misses his land drop, and can only pass a turn. Daniel plays a Wasteland as his land drop. He then taps a Soul Ring, floating 1 colorless to cast an Expedition Map. He spends the floating mana to cast a Sensei's Divining Top. With nothing else he wants to do on his turn, he passes. Baron draws and plays a Command Tower. He taps both lands to cast an Orzhov Signet. I start my turn by playing a snow-covered island, and tapping 3 mana to cast Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. Because the Torpor Orb is on the field, his ETB does not go off, which includes the Sacrifice clause. Jose draws for turn, and again does not find a land. He moves to his end step, and discards down to 7. While he's doing that, Daniel takes the time to crack his Expedition Map, and chooses to grab a Cavern of Souls, naming Eldrazi. Daniel starts his turn, and plays the Cavern of Souls, and pays 1 to activate the Sensei's Top to look at the top 3 cards of his library, and rearrange them. He then taps the top to draw a card, and puts the top on top of his library. He follows that up by casting a Thought-Knot Seer, but its Enter the Battlefield ability also doesn't trigger thanks to the Torpor Orb. Baron draws for turn and plays a Tainted Field. He then taps out using his Signet to cast a Smothering Tithe. After that, he passes the turn to me. I untap and draw. I use my Soul Ring to pay for the Tithe tax. I then play a Reflecting Pool as my land drop. After that, I move to my attack step and swing Uro at Daniel. When I do, Uro's attack trigger goes off and I draw a card, gain 3 life, but do not have an additional land to play. Baron makes a treasure, and Daniel chooses not to block and takes 6 damage. After that, I pay 3 to cast a Nissa Vastwood Seer, losing 2 life from the Ancient Tomb. Jose draws for turn, and finally finds a land. He plays the Swamp as his land for turn. Jose couldn't pay for the Tithe tax, and Baron creates a treasure. He then taps both mana to cast a Baleful Strix. He almost draws a card, but remembers the Torpor Orb is on the field, and just passes the turn. Daniel draws his card for turn, and declines to pay for the Tithe tax, and allows Baron to create another treasure. Daniel then plays an Eldrazi Temple. He uses it to help pay 7 mana to cast Bane of Bala-Ged. After that, he moves to combat and swings the Thought Knot at Baron for 4 damage. Baron untaps and draws for turn. He plays a tapped Prairie Stream as his land drop, and then taps 3 to cast the first commander of the game, Sefris of the Hidden Ways. After that, he cracks his treasure to cast Whispering Madness, but I meet it with a negate. I start turn 5, drawing a card and not paying for the Tithe tax. I cast a Read the Bones, scrying 2, leaving 1 on top, then drawing 2 cards and losing 2 life. Not paying for the Tithe tax, and Baron makes 2 more treasures. After that, I play a Snow-Covered Swamp as my land drop, then move to my attack phase and attack Daniel with Uro again, drawing another card, gaining 3 life, and dropping an additional forest on the field. After that, I end my turn. Jose declines to pay the Tithe tax on his draw step, and Baron makes another treasure. He then finds and plays a Breeding Pool, dealing 2 damage to himself to have it enter untap. He chooses to cast a Rampant Growth to search up a swamp to the field, and passes. Daniel draws and pays for the Tithe with his Soul Ring. He then plays a City of Traders. After that, he moves to his attack phase and swings his Eldrazi at Baron for 11 damage. The Bane of Bala-Ged also forces him to exile 2 permanents, and Baron decides to exile a couple of treasure tokens. On his second main phase, Daniel casts a Skittering Invasion, creating 5 Eldrazi spawns. With nothing else, he ends the turn. Baron untaps and draws. He then taps out and cracks his remaining treasures to pay for Avacyn, Angel of Hope. I start turn 6 by using my Soul Ring to pay for the Tithe tax. I then play another Snow-Covered Island as my land drop, and then cast a Farhaven Elf for absolutely no value. Since that was my 7th land, Nissa Vastwood Seer transforms into Nissa Sage Animist. I choose to use her +1 ability to reveal the top card of my library, which is a Kodama of the East Tree, and I get to put it into my hand. Jose draws for turn and doesn't pay the tax. He then pays 2 mana to cast a Night's Whisperer, drawing 2 cards and losing 2 life, again not paying the Tithe tax. After that, he casts a Traverse the Ulvenwald, but only grabs a forest since he does not have Delirium. He then plays that forest as his land for turn, and then passes to Daniel. Daniel draws for turn, and doesn't pay for the Tithe this time. He then sacks his Eldrazi, and taps enough mana to cast his commander, Emrakul, the Promised End. Daniel then chooses to take Baron's next turn with Emrakul's cast trigger. He then recasts his Sensei's Divining Top. After that, he ends his turn, and takes over Baron's turn. He starts the turn off by cracking all of Baron's treasures for black mana to cast a Painful Truth to pay 1 life to draw 1 card. After that, he moves to combat and attacks my Nissa with Avacyn, taking her out. With nothing else, he ends the turn. Baron then takes his extra turn by playing an island for turn, and casting Nadar, Selfless Paladin, Thanks to the Torpor Orb, Baron doesn't get to venture into the dungeon. He follows that up by casting Glenn, the Voice of Calm. Baron moves into combat and swings Avacyn my way for 8 damage. I untap and draw for turn, and play a swamp as my land drop. And remember to pay for the tithe tax with my Soul Ring. After that, I tap 6 to cast ᴅᴜᴜᴍᴜ, but don't get to search for a land. I want to swing again, but...
Swing!
No, he's got a big ass...
I got you.
You got me?
I got you.
Even though I don't trust Jose as far as I can throw him, I swing at Daniel with Uro. And draw a card, gain 3 life, and put a clear water pathway on the field. Baron also makes a treasure from the card draw, and before damage, Daniel pays 1 to activate the Sensei's top to look at the top 3 cards of his library, and takes 6 damage. On my end step, Jose plays a cast down on the Bane of Bala-Ged, destroying it. Jose untaps and draws for turn, paying for the tithe. He then taps out to cast a Nighthawk Scavenger. There is currently every card type in our graveyards, which will give it +6 power. He then ends his turn. Daniel starts his turn drawing a card and not paying the tax. He then skips through his main phase and just attacks Baron with Emrakul. Baron soaks up 8 of the damage by blocking with Avacyn, and then takes 5 trample damage. On his second main phase, he taps the City of Traders, floating the 2 mana, and plays a Wastes, forcing him to sacrifice the City of Traders. He then taps out and pays 10 to cast Kozilek, Butcher of Truth. Daniel draws 4 cards from the cast trigger, and Baron creates 4 more treasures. Baron draws for turn and cracks a few treasures to help pay for an Archon of Cruelty, but again, Torpor Orb keeps it from being anything other than just a 6/6 flyer. He then cracks his remaining 4 treasures to cast a Midnight Pathlighter, making all his creatures unblockable except by legendary creatures. Baron then moves to combat and swings everything at Daniel. When Nadar attacks, Baron chooses to venture into the dungeon. He then scries 1 and puts it on the bottom of his library. Daniel decides to block Nadar with Kozilek and then takes 11 damage. This allows Baron to draw a card off of Glenn and venture 4 more times, choosing Mine Tunnels to create a treasure token, then Dark Pool to have each of us lose 1 life and he gains 1 life. And then complete the dungeon and draw a card. Unfortunately for Baron, he doesn't get anything from Sefris' ability since he does not have any creatures in the graveyard. He still has 1 more venture activation and just re-enters the same dungeon, scrying 1 and leaving it on top. I start my turn again paying for Smothering Tithe. I then cast a Tireless Provisioner and play a Snow-Covered Forest as my land drop. This creates a treasure token from the Provisioner. I choose not to attack and simply end the turn. Jose untaps and draws for turn. He plays a forest as his land drop. He then moves into combat and swings at me for 7, gaining 7 life. Baron reminds him about the Smothering Tithe and Jose decides to pay for it, and end his turn. Daniel draws, doesn't pay for the tithe tax, and Baron gets to create another treasure. He then taps 7 mana to cast an All Is Dust, wiping the board of all colored permanents. Since Sefris sees another creature die, Baron gets to venture again and create another treasure token. Daniel then moves to his attack phase and swings all his creatures at Baron, knocking him out of the game. On his end step, I cast a Thrilling Encore to return all the creatures put into their owners' graveyards this turn under my control. Unfortunately, I still don't get any of the ETBs. I then start turn 9, finally not having to pay any taxes. I move straight to combat and swing enough damage to take out Daniel and his damn Torpor Orb, and swing the rest of my creatures at Jose for 5 damage. Before damage resolves, Jose casts a Heartless Act on his own Vampire Nighthawk to keep me from gaining any life. Uro's attack trigger goes off and I gain 3 life and draw a card. Now that the orb is gone, I decide to finally cast my commander, Yarok the Desecrated. After that, I tap 4, forgetting to take 2 from my Ancient Tomb, to cast Gonti, Lord of Luxury. As it enters, I look at the top 4 cards of Jose's library, and exiling 1 of them, but with Yarok on the field, I get to do it twice instead. I follow that up by casting a Growth Spiral to draw a card. I find a Breeding Pool and play it as my land for turn, triggering the tireless provisioner, making 2 treasures. With nothing else, I pass to 𝐄𝐩𝐢. 𝐄𝐩𝐢 starts his turn by casting a Harrow, sacrificing a forest, and searching up a forest and a swamp to the battlefield. He follows that up by casting a Vampire Nighthawk. On his end step, I reveal one of the cards exiled with ⴄ Liliana's Triumph, making him sacrifice the vampire. Turn 10 starts with me casting Kodama of the Eastry and taking 2 life from the tomb. I then play a tapped Overgrown Tomb, making 2 more treasures with the provisioner. After that, I move to combat and swing at 𝐄𝐩𝐢 with the team. 𝐄𝐩𝐢 then takes 28. I then cast the other card exiled with ⴄ, a Night Veil Predator. But we did forget the Uro attack trigger, so we go back a bit. I draw a card, gain 3 life, and play a Mystic Sanctuary, and returning the Thrilling Encore to the top of my library. He then takes another 1 damage, since the ⴅ grew by 1. 𝐄𝐩𝐢 starts his turn by casting his commander, Rayami, First of the Fallen. He follows that up by attempting to Pongify my ⴅ In response, I cast a Heroic Intervention, giving all my creatures hexproof and indestructible. He then casts a Black Knight, extends the hand, and concedes. Well, it wasn't pretty, but Yarok got me there. Staring down a turn 1 Torpor Orb is every Yarok player's nightmare. It completely shut off what my deck is designed to do. While I do run some spells that can get it off the field, most of the artifact removal comes in the form of creatures with ETB effects. I'll definitely be making some changes to my deck so that I have more ways of interacting with the orb in the future. Daniel had an amazing turn 1, and the turns just got worse and worse for us the longer the game went. He seemed to just keep landing haymakers on the table. At one point, he tried pointing out how big a problem Baron's Avacyn was, but we just shrugged it off, because he controlled an Emrakul at the time. In the end, All His Dust was the spell that helped him take care of Baron, but inevitably lost him the game, since I had the Thrilling Encore at the ready. Baron had a good showing, but did not get the dungeon portion of his deck going until it was too late. The deck normally has a lot of creatures in the graveyard, and he's just finishing dungeons left and right, returning all his creatures to the battlefield. But even if his game plan was stifled a bit, he was able to make a big difference by keeping the pressure on Daniel the entire game, but inevitably, he fell to the Eldrazi threat. What can I say about 𝐄𝐩𝐢? He's a gambling man. His starting hand would have been pretty good if he would have just found a land earlier in the game. Trust me, he reminded us of this the entire game. But missing his land drops till turn 4 just set him back way too much to get back into the game. So this is just a friendly reminder not to keep one land hands. Well, that's it for this episode. We hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like the video and leave a comment, and if you aren't already subscribed, hit the subscribe button. Before we go, we'd like to give a big thank you to our amazing patrons. We are glad to have your support and thankful for each and every one of you. We here at In Response would like to thank you for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and make sure you follow us on our social medias. We also stream every Friday night at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you for watching. Have an awesome day.